From bureaus worldwide, this is FSN.
Yes, it's Tuesday, November the 5th. It's bonfire night here in the UK. Live from Salford, it's your Richie Allen Show. Hope you've had a good Tuesday. And thanks as always for choosing to join me. I've got two brilliant guests lined up for you this particular show. Think you're going to like it. As usual, tweet the bejesus out of me. Tweet the bejesus out of me. I look forward to hearing from you. Kay, dear, let's do it.
Fabulous.
It's all good.
It's the Richie Allen Show. Broadcasting live on richieallen.co.uk and multiple platforms around the world. And now, here's your host, Richie Allen.
Now, Jeffrey Epstein is a very, very good writer and reporter, and he's been on this program many times over the years. Jeffrey these days, amongst putting excellent articles on jeffreyjaxen.com, can often be found on RT, Infowars, Waking Times, and he's also actively working right now with Del Bigtree on The High Wire, okay, providing very important breaking news stories and investigative reporting. We're going to talk with Jeffrey this backlash that some celebrities are getting when they stick up for those who claim to have been injured by vaccines. The latest, of course, is the host of Real Time, Bill Maher. This is a very interesting story. To talk about that and more, Jeffrey Jaxen returns to the programme. And in the second hour, my old friend Jim Fetzer drops in from Madison, Wisconsin. I won't give you Jim's resume, you know all about him now. A couple of weeks ago, Jim was ordered to pay $500,000 in defamation damages to Lenny Posner, the father of Noah Posner. This is, of course, about Sandy Hook and Jim's belief that Sandy Hook never happened and that nobody died. So Jim Fetzer joins us in the second hour to talk about that. It is Tuesday's Richie Allen Show, and it's live in lots of different places. Indeed. Yeah. Spare a thought not just for Danimals, not just for Danimals tonight, the animals, the cats and the dogs and the parrots and the parakeets, but for anybody who's of a nervous disposition, because it does get very loud. And it does scare people. It is bonfire night. If you're going out, have a good night. Enjoy the bonfires and the fireworks. Does anybody wheel guys around in wheelbarrows for money anymore? You don't see them. When I first arrived in the UK years and years and years and years ago, people did go around with guys, you know, the effigy of Guy Fawkes. But I've not been seeing any in recent years. Yeah, I know. I bang on. You well, you are. Jacob Rees-Mogg, terminological inexactitude, darling, has been criticised roundly for saying, allegedly, that it would have been common sense to leave the Grenfell Tower fire, the Grenfell building, to flee it and ignore fire brigade advice. He's the leader of the House of Commons. He was appearing on a radio phone-in. It was LBC with Nick Ferrari, and they were talking about the findings of the Grenfell Inquiry report. That's when he made the comments. The Grenfell United group have condemned his comments as insulting. Mogg said, or Rees-Mogg said, that he profoundly apologised. 72 people, as we know, maybe more, died in that horrible fire, excuse me, nearly 2.5 years ago. What did Mogg say exactly? What could be so horrible and so hurtful? Well, you can decide for yourself.
The more one's read over the weekend about the report and about the chances of people surviving, if you just ignore what you're told and leave, you are so much safer. And I think if either of us were in a fire, whatever the fire brigade said, we would leave the burning building. It just seems the common sense thing to do.
Yeah. I'd like you to hear that again, because I can't find anything that requires an apology in that statement.
The more one's read over the weekend about the report and about the chances of people surviving, if you just ignore...
The more one has read, remember, this is the context, the more we have come to understand since the weekend.
Ignore what you're told and leave, you are so much safer. And
now...
I think if either of us were in a fire, whatever the fire brigade said, we would leave the burning building. It just seems the common sense thing to do.
How dare he?
Oh, won't somebody please think of the children?
Yeah, he's not said anything offensive there, I don't think. Here's Rob Pell, Sky News reporter.
Well, I think those initial comments on LBC have caused a lot of offence.
Offence to fucking who? Who? Since the weekend. Haven't learned, haven't understood what we understand now. I think if you or I were in a fire and we were told to stay put, we wouldn't, is what he said. What did he say? That has the virtue signallers crawling out from under their fucking rocks. Exactly.
To residents, relatives of victims in this area of West London next to Grenfell Tower. I was just talking to one business owner who said that in his view it showed a complete lack of awareness.
What? It shows a complete fucking understanding of awareness. He's referring to the report the fire brigade themselves have admitted that they should have scrapped the stay put advice 2 or 3 hours sooner. Holy Jesus. They couldn't have been more clear in their report. Mog, whom I don't know anything about personally, and who I have no political alignment with whatsoever, is fucking saying, in light of what they said over the weekend, I think you or I wouldn't listen now if we were unfortunate enough to be caught up in a fire, right? Right? Of victim culture, huh?
On the part of people in power to communities affected by this fire, but also a lack of compassion for people who have...
Holy Jesus, there was nothing compassionless about what he said.
Seen close friends, family members perish in Grenfell Tower too.
They're dead now. They're dead. They're long gone. They've shuffled off this mortal coil. It's important we find out how they died and why. But they're not here to be offended. Right?
2 years ago. I think also this is politically quite damaging as well for Jacob Rees-Mogg and the Conservative Party, obviously on the eve of the official...
I am Frank Grimes in The Simpsons. I am. What in the name of God is going on today? Listen to what Jacob Rees-Mogg said.
The more one's read over the weekend about the report and about the chances of people surviving...
The more one's read about the report since the weekend about the chances of people surviving, yes.
If you just ignore what you're told and leave...
You've got a better chance.
You are so much safer. And,
yeah.
And I think if either of us were in a fire, whatever the fire brigade said, we would leave the burning building. It just seems the common sense thing to do.
Yeah, that's what I would have said too. John Healy is the Labour Party Shadow Housing Secretary. He couldn't wait to try and make hay while this sun shone. John Healy, listen to this.
I'm glad he's been forced to apologise, but...
Forced to apologise for what?
This was not a slip of the tongue, it's...
What do you mean it wasn't a slip of the tongue? He just said, we've learned over the weekend that they should have left fucking sooner. And knowing that now, if I was stuck in a building, I wouldn't listen to the fire brigade personally.
It's the mindset of the nasty party and...
It's the mindset of the nasty party, yeah.
Let's be clear about the substance. These were people fearing for their lives, staying put because the firefighters told them to do so, and the fire service operating to national guidelines. So some people did try to get out and died in the stairs. So
yeah, and they wouldn't have died if they tried to get out earlier.
So what he said was shameful.
Nothing shameful about it.
I'm glad he's been forced to...
Fuck off. Stormzy, the grime artist, has called for Jacob Rees-Mogg to resign. Stormzy, yeah, proper genius Stormzy, in a series of tweets. Stormzy said that Mogg was actually saying that those who died weren't smart enough to escape. But of course he didn't say that, did he? Stormzy's not much... Well, I'm not going to get into it. I was going to start taking a royal piss out of Stormzy, but I'm not going to do it. Oh, Jesus, it's 12 minutes past the hour. These things do make me angry. Why did Mogg apologise? Why apologise and give in to these clowns? And I don't mean the families of those who died are clowns. They're not. I'm not saying that. But it isn't them who's complaining. The Grenfell United group came out. Yeah, one dickhead. One arsehole said, oh, it's terrible, he should apologise. Yeah, I think he was giving you a very good piece of information there. If you're in a building that's more than 10 or 12 stories tall and you're up the top and you smell fucking smoke and the fire brigade says, hey, I tell you what, stay where you are, get the fuck out of that building. Quick, fucking smart, lightning speed. End of story. The government has denied claims this afternoon that it is suppressing a report on alleged Russian interference in UK democracy until after the general election. This is an interesting developing story. They've denied that they are suppressing this report on Russian interference. We're not suppressing it, they say. Sources said Number 10 was stalling on releasing the report, which has gained the standard security clearance, so why not release it? A former head of MI5, Lord Evans of Weardale, has said release it. Foreign Minister Christopher Pincher said that Boris Johnson would release it in due course. But he said we can't rush it at the risk of undermining our national security, but it's been given MI5 clearance. What's in this report? Well, it examines Russian activity, including allegations of espionage, subversion and interference in elections, including the 2017 general election, and of course the referendum, the EU referendum. Dominic Grieve, the chair of the House Intelligence Committee, says there's no reason not to publish now. Here's the Conservative Party chairman, James Cleverly. He was asked this afternoon, James, old son, why the delay?
Well, people will speculate. That often happens. But as I say, without seeing the content, I can't verify or indeed contradict the points that have been made. All I know is that I am focusing as party chairman on the forthcoming general election. As you say, I've been heavily involved in that. I can't comment, I can't speculate on the nature of that report.
No, you can't comment. James Cleverly, the Conservative Party chairman, don't know. I haven't seen it myself, he says. I presume he's telling the truth. It's likely to be released after the election. It alleges Russian interference. I wouldn't put a 5p piece on anything in the report being true. But that's me. On the report, here's Sky's Alistair Bunkle.
The problem is we don't know precisely what is in the report. We can speculate that it could contain evidence that Russia has interfered in UK elections, particularly the 2017 election and the EU referendum. But that would just be speculation. We could also speculate that it might reveal links, some financial links through donations between parts of the Russian government, or people with links to the Russian government and the Conservative Party, or perhaps the Leave campaign. But again, we can only speculate. We don't know this until Boris Johnson decides to release the report. And such is the sensitive nature of the Intelligence and Security Committee and those that sit on it, and it might sound surprising to watchers of Westminster politics, but it doesn't actually leak. And so they are keeping stum, despite the fact that they want this out in the open. What, of course, is just very strange is that, given that it is a report into potential or alleged interference in democracy, and given that we are now right on the eve of an official election campaign, most people conclude that it would make sense to have this report out in the open now in case it should need to inform anybody ahead of this election campaign. It doesn't look as though that's going to happen.
There you are.
Okay. Alistair, thank you.
That's all we can say. That was Alistair Bunkle on Sky News. Can't say any more than that. Alistair Bunkle. The time is 16 minutes, well, just over 16 minutes past the hour. This is the Richie Allen Show, by the way. How you doing? Hi to Faisal, who says, Richie, I'm not convinced. Excuse me, he says, I am still convinced more people died in Grenfell than was reported, as they seem not to need to declare the dead that were not identified. It's a very good point. Sharon Gale, how you doing, Sharon, agrees with that and says people who lived there would agree with you. Mwinga says, I remember many residents who survived saying it. Even celebrities like Lily Allen said the same thing. More people probably died tragically. Yes, absolutely right. Joe Public says, Richie, what about the US interference in this election already? Very good point, Joe. Chris tweets, Richie, maybe the reason that the Russia report hasn't been released is that, like in the US, it's a complete nothing burger. Absolutely. We're doing our bit to keep the Russophobia going. Also, it might reveal how many huge Russian donors there are to the Conservative Party. Very good. Patrick says on Jacob Rees-Mogg, how are you, Patrick? Richie, Jacob Rees-Mogg stated the bleeding obvious, triggering some dickheads, says Patrick. The mouth on you, Patrick. And then apologising for telling it as it is. Ridiculous, says Patrick. The fire brigade at Grenfell gave the wrong advice and people died because of it, period, says Patrick. They didn't move very quickly or quickly enough to change that advice, Patrick. There doesn't seem to be any doubt about that. The Richie Allen Show, live on Tuesday, November 5th, 2019. Jim Fetzer in hour 2. Jefferey Jaxen joins the programme in about 10 minutes' time, a bit less than that. Funny exchange this morning on Sky News between Kay Burley and Michael Gove. Michael Gove is the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster. Yes, what a load of bollocks that is. Monumental bollocks, I would say. The Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster. Kay Burley asked him, Michael, would your pal Boris Johnson please, the Prime Minister that is, take part in Sky election debates? Michael Gove.
Well, Sky is, of course,
Don't blow a wind up my skirt now. Just tell us whether he's going to come or not.
Well, I haven't checked with the PM's diary, so I don't know. But
we can move our schedule around for him.
Yes, Boris is a brilliant performer, but ultimately the key choice at this election is between Boris and Jeremy Corbyn. And I think one of the things
Which is why they should go head-to-head on Sky.
Well,
a three-way debate, in fact, with Joe Swinson as well.
I think one of the issues there is that ultimately there are two choices for Prime Minister.
She doesn't think so.
Joe wouldn't, and, fair play to her. But ultimately, even I think the most optimistic Liberal Democrat supporter doesn't think that Joe is going to be Prime Minister. The choice is either Jeremy Corbyn or Boris Johnson as our Prime Minister. And I think over the course of the next 39 days, we'll be focusing in on that straightforward choice for this country.
OK, and if I was to take you back to my question, will the Prime Minister come and appear on our debates? He ducked it when I did it last time with Jeremy Hunt.
I will ask him when I go back to Cabinet later today.
OK, do you think he should?
I think it's a matter for him, because I think one of the things about all the debate formats...
He's scared, isn't he? How embarrassing.
I don't think there's anyone who can accuse Boris Johnson of lack of courage.
He was absolutely terrified of facing me in the head-to-heads, and so he ducked it.
What was that again, Kay?
He was absolutely terrified of facing me in the head-to-heads, and so he ducked it.
He ducked it, did he?
What kind of fuckery are you?
That's megalomania right there. Boris Johnson was absolutely terrified of facing me in the head-to-head, so he ducked it. That is glorious, naked. It's almost nakedly endearing, or endearingly naked megalomania. I am so good at what I do that Boris Johnson crapped in his trousers rather than face me, said Kay. Oh, by the way, I didn't miss this.
Don't blow a wind up my skirt now. Just tell us whether he's going to come or not.
Yeah, I love Kay.
Don't blow a wind up my skirt now. Just tell us whether he's going to come or not.
You gotta love it. You gotta love it. How are you doing? This is the Richie Allen Radio Show, live on Fab Radio 2 in Manchester and multiple platforms around the world. This is Mike Morrison back with Jefferey Jaxen in about 3 minutes. How you doing? Mark Morrison, return of the Mac on the Richie Allen Show. I see Martin Scorsese has kept up his attack on Marvel films. It's not just Marvel films, it's superhero films in general, or movies. Yeah, he doesn't like them very much. I've had my say on them myself. He's doubled down as Scorsese, writing an op-ed in the press. In the New York Times, was it? Is that where he wrote the op-ed? I was reading a bit of it today. He said, I've tried to watch a few of these films, and he described them and Hollywood itself as brutal and inhospitable to art. There is a wonderful book which the oft-mentioned future Mrs. Allen purchased for me some years ago, and I always get the title wrong. It's called Easy Riders and Raging Bulls, or Raging Bulls and Easy Riders, and it documents Hollywood from the late 60s up until the advent of the multiplex cinema and what happened to film and art and the expression of art and ideas and how what was artistic, how, cinema as an artistic thing, how it became what it is now, dumbed down crap, basically a 90-minute music video. And Scorsese's article is very good. I recommend you check it out. Just Google, or see, we said this morning, didn't we? Don't Google, use another search engine, but go looking for Scorsese and Marvel movies, and you'll, I think, be interested in reading that. Right, it's time to move on and to reintroduce my first guest today, because he's been on the programme many times in the past. I have a lot of time for him. Before we say hello to him, let me read you this from Forbes magazine. On the November 1st, 2019 episode of Real Time with Bill Maher, Bill had a conversation with paediatrician Jay Gordon, MD. And Jay is known for providing troves of high-profile families with personal belief exemptions and medical exemptions to postpone or forego vaccinations for their children. Sounds like an interesting guy. The article continues. As the Tony Pockets of Los Angeles County have seen some of the lowest vaccination rates in the nation, coupled with increasingly frequent outbreaks of vaccine-preventable illnesses such as measles, pertussis and flu, many have raised concerns about the validity of the exemptions given by the paediatrician Jay Gordon. Bill Maher, known for his share of scepticism of healthcare recommendations and physicians, in the interview brings up the point that vaccines may play a role in causing autism. That's Bill Maher. And that has resulted in very serious attacks on Bill Maher, his character, and I'm watching it with great interest because we're seeing similar things happen here in the UK. Now, you know all about Jeffery Jaxen, of course. You know all about Jeffery. Right now, he's doing some stellar work on the Highwire podcast with Del Bigtree, which provides brilliant analysis, reporting, and breaking news stories. Jeffery writes at jeffreyjaxen.com, but his work can be found in many places. He's been featured by RT, by Natural News, by Infowars, and by many others. I believe him to be a very credible writer, very objective and fair, and his work, his articles, his opinion pieces are always very, very well sourced. Okay, always with indexes providing you where he got his information from. He's a bit of a star. Let's welcome back Jeffery Jaxen to the programme. Jeffery, welcome back. Thanks for taking the call.
Hey, Richie. Great to be on with you. Thanks.
Thanks very much. Hey, listen, before we talk about Bill Maher then, what about this paediatrician who was helping families to get exemptions for their vaccines? I'm surprised that he's not, coming under maybe more attack than he appears to be. I think if he was an English doctor, I think he might be facing tribunals, maybe facing being struck off. Jeffrey, who is this guy, this Jay Gordon?
He's just a pediatrician in I like to say the vaccine risk awareness movement. He's someone that believes not just the government talking points and the bumper sticker slogans of vaccines are safe and effective. He's looked at the science. He's seen it in his own practice. Vaccine injuries. He knows that vaccine injuries are real. We're not talking about statistics here. We're not having a conversation about how many and the greater good, but they happen. So he's having a conversation about this. And yes, there is a lot of that happening right now, especially in California, where they just passed a bill, SB 276, which puts your medical exemptions in the hands of government bureaucrats and out of your doctor's hands. So there is no more doctor-patient relationship when it comes to vaccines and medical exemptions in California. And this bill, the spirit of this bill is sweeping across the U.S. right now, and other states are trying to adopt it, such as Massachusetts, where I'm at right now.
You'll know that the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, well, he is for the time being. There's an election here in 6 weeks. He's gone down the legal route of investigating whether they can mandate them here in the UK. You know this because you're right across this story. Before we talk about what's been happening to Bill Maher, in Forbes magazine, Jeffrey, just for me to play the devil's advocate for a bit, they claim that in Los Angeles, some pockets of that great city have seen, because of the low vaccination rates, have seen increasingly frequent outbreaks of whooping cough and measles and flu. Is there any truth in that?
Well, according to their statistics, sure. But let's talk about clusters, and also let's talk about vaccine efficacy. Does the vaccine even work? So we're talking about a flu vaccine that is basically, on its good years, no better than a coin toss. On its bad years, I believe it was in 2015 in Canada, it was 0% effective. And the health minister came out and said, doesn't work. Take it anyway, doesn't work. A lot of times it's 20-30% effective. And they're searching for a universal flu vaccine because the one they have currently, which they have to pick the virus, the flu virus, basically the year before and hope it's the right one is totally inefficient. The mumps vaccine, similar thing, very inefficient vaccine. We were told that the MMR vaccine, the measles vaccine, we were only supposed to get one of those. We'd have lifelong immunity when they first rolled it out, their marketing campaign. Now they're telling people and some college students to take a third dose. So we have to have a conversation also about are the vaccines working as they were billed to work, and that's not even counting for safety. So where the reporting systems, I know I'm going off on a tangent here, but
it's good.
Reporting systems are not adequate. They are, in all intents and purposes, broken. And a lot of the doctors don't even give informed consent before they give the shot. They give the shot, send you on your way with a little package. And in that package are the list of adverse reactions, or like what we call harms, because it's just a harm is just another reaction. So a lot of issues there, but let's take the measles outbreak. Excuse me. We called it the Red Scare here in America because media outlets were hyperventilating, and government agencies were forcing these shots on people. We even had an emergency declaration in parts of Brooklyn, New York, where basically if you were breathing air and didn't have that shot, you were fined. What I mean by if you were existing in those certain zip codes and didn't have your MMR shot, you were fined $1,000. And that is where we're going with this is surveillance systems. The implementation of this is going to start getting more like a tightened noose. So what in the past were clusters, where you'd see a cluster of measles, people would recover, especially in America. I mean, this is not a great death rate. The CDC here, Centers for Disease Control, is bent over backwards because of vaping. People, getting hospitalized from vaping more than we were ever put towards any type of vaccine injury, or legions of parents claiming that this vaccine is causing pretty much the exact same chronic health conditions or autistic spectrum disorder features in their children. This is all across the world. So where's the focus here? I mean, e-cigarettes, great, but how about something that's being forced upon the population? Let's look at the safety on this thing.
Yeah, it's a very good analogy you make there, because the e-cigarettes, I've had the co-founder of LiveLeak.com on the program recently talking about this, Hayden Hewitt, and he's absolutely bewildered. You've had a couple of cases, alleged cases, the proper study hasn't been done, that vaping might be a problem, and you've had screams and cries and calls, and yet there is better than anecdotal evidence that some vaccines are very, very problematic. Of course, Gardasil being one of them, and you can't get a whisper. You can't get even a sniff of what in the UK what we would call a public inquiry. There should be a public inquiry in the Republic of Ireland, in the UK, in Denmark, but not. It's staggering stuff, Jeffrey. Do you want to remind? Let's go back to the flu thing. You said something very profound, very important about the flu vaccine and how, no pun intended, a shot in the dark is taken from year to year. So in 2019, they'll try and predict the flu strain for 2020 and so on. And they'll try and draw up, or they'll try and manufacture a vaccine. And it often doesn't work. That will be news to many of our listeners. Can you just briefly go over that little nugget of information again? Because it's very important that people know this, that the flu vaccine is far from reliable.
Yeah, the World Health Organization has a certain team that convenes, and this is before the flu season starts, well before the flu season starts, because the manufacturers have to have time to grow the live virus in eggs and produce this vaccine, millions and millions of doses. So this takes a long time. So they have to, using their best guess, that's capital G, guess, what virus is going to be prominent in this coming flu season. So they're basically looking into a crystal ball. I'm sure there's some computer algorithms that play there, and statistics from the previous seasons, and they guess. And it's like I said, it's rarely higher than a coin toss. Right. And then we have something here called the National Vaccine Injury Compensation Program, and because we basically a private citizen can't just outright go sue a manufacturer for damage, you have to go through this court and basically go against the Department of Justice attorneys who, that's a separate story. But the flu vaccine, my point of saying this is the flu vaccine is consistently number one on that list for the damages caused and the payouts. So, that might be a coincidence because the flu vaccine is also maybe the one that has the most uptake. But regardless, it's always on there as number one with, anything from Guillain-Barré syndrome to death. So this is a shot that is a big issue. And I know in the UK they had the swine flu lawsuits.
Oh, yeah.
And they were successfully sued there. They rolled out the swine flu back in, I believe that was 2000. Boy, my memory does not serve me correctly.
It was the mid-2000s, wasn't it? It was the mid to late 2000s, if I remember, when we were told about swine flu and that vaccine.
Absolutely. And they did not have the safety trials for that. The safety trials were not done. So they rolled that out in the population. And this is why these lawsuits are winning, because when they do go to court, they look at the safety data and say, well, what basis do you have to put this out there? Well, the safety data wasn't there. There was signals that it was causing narcolepsy. It was causing other things. And this is what these people in the UK, they sued them for millions.
Yeah, that's right. Jeffrey Jaxen is our guest. It's jeffreyjaxen.com, doing a lot of very interesting stuff with Del Bigtree, the Highwire podcast. You've got to check that out if you haven't checked it out before. It's very easy to find it online. And of course, Jeffrey has for many years been writing about health issues, not just about vaccines, pretty much everything to do with our health. He's been watching, doing the job of the mainstream media, really, holding big pharmaceutical companies and big healthcare providers to account, and he does it very well. Good to have you back on the show, Jeffrey. So Bill Maher then, such a high-profile show. I know not everybody has HBO. I think it still goes out on HBO. I know not everybody has it. But he's a high-profile comedian, actor, and a TV presenter. Bit of a backlash, because he said that he still believes, he believes himself, despite knowing that he's going to come in for some stick when he says it. He says, yes, I think there is a link between vaccines and autism. What's been happening to him in the last few days? Bit of a pile-on, I believe.
Yeah, after about 2-3 days after the episode came out, I counted 9 mainstream articles and blogs, hit pieces against him. Pretty much none of them across the board were giving anything except a hit piece. They weren't giving any real statistics. They weren't showing the lack of placebo-controlled trials in the vaccine safety studies. They weren't showing the lack of vax versus unvaxxed studies, showing total health outcomes in children. Nothing. They were just basically hitting him up saying he's going to cause outbreaks. How dare he do this because measles is on the rise. He's a danger to society, so on and so forth. Now, Bill Maher's he's definitely not somebody that doesn't like criticism. I mean, his show is all about criticism. He's a comedian and he walks that line every show. So it was interesting that he's able to walk the line with a lot of other really controversial topics, but the second he touched vaccines, this guy became a numero uno target.
And I've never been a name dropper, but I am occasionally in touch with the actor Rob Schneider. He does listen to independent media shows. I'm sure, I know that Rob's a big fan of the Highwire and you guys there, and he dips in and out of the Richie Allen Show every now and then. And I've had a couple of exchanges with him on Twitter. And same for guys like him. They're asking questions, not telling people what they should and shouldn't do, not declaring anything to be true or untrue, Jeffrey, just saying, look, we need to have a closer look at this. And what really annoys me about this is I remember about 12 months ago, I was introduced, I think I came by the man through you, my friend, Dr. Robert Rowan, MD in California, lovely guy. Again, a genuinely qualified doctor, and he was saying to me, why don't we have a test? Why don't we have a serious study where we vaccinate so many thousand and we unvaccinate so many thousand, and we wait and we watch over the coming years how those vaccinated get on against the unvaccinated, how their health progresses. Common sense, you would have thought, but no, they get piled in on as well. You wonder, are the people behind these agendas, are they a bit thick or a bit dim, Jeffrey? Because their reaction to, just harmless questions or just a basic request for some answers always tends to be aggressive, trying to destroy the person asking the question. It tends to kind of backfire on them, doesn't it? Well, I hope it does.
Yeah, it sure does. And I would say they're a bit desperate right now at this point. And to speak about Rob Schneider, he's got guts. That's the thing I keep saying, because show me one other person has questioned this vaccine agenda. I mean, we have Bill Maher now, but let's see his staying power. Let's see how long his message stays to question it. Let's see if he doesn't come out in an episode in 2 weeks from now and say,
apologize.
"Look, I screwed up," and backtracks it. So Bill Maher, and this was a very, people pointed this out to me on Twitter. This was not a debate that Bill Maher had. It was a very light discussion. But all he said essentially was, look, we have to take into account individual people. Different people are different. People have different family histories. This isn't a crazy thing. The doctors, he said, doctors say we're right on this. Well, and they say, when have we been wrong? Well, always, pretty much. I mean, he used the example of salt. He said, I've been avoiding salt my whole life. Now it's supposed to be good. Trans fats. He said, just in my case, you put mercury in my teeth.
Yeah. And we know how dangerous that is. Let me ask you this, because listeners will be screaming at me. Was there some hope, despite how, eccentric Donald Trump is and how disappointing he has been in terms of foreign policy and all of that, but wasn't there a little bit of hope that the president would at least open the door to a more, dare I say, particularly about Trump, dare I say, mature debate about vaccines? Because he talked about his own family, didn't he? And he gave the impression, certainly before the election, I know he met with Dr. Andy Wakefield. He'll always be Dr. Andy Wakefield to me. I don't care what they say here in the UK. But Donald Trump did meet with him. There was some optimism, Jeffrey. What's happened there?
No one knows. Actually, I was recently in Connecticut. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was supposed to debate Yale professors, Yale doctors, 3 to 4 of them, I believe. And they all pulled out from the debate, shocker, at the last minute the night before. So Kennedy Jr. basically just had a 4-hour vaccine discussion with all the facts. It's online. Anybody can watch it. But in that discussion, because he was picked, he had a conversation, closed-door conversation with Donald Trump soon after he was elected to head up an independent vaccine safety commission to look at these questions we're having. And Kennedy said during his speech in Connecticut, he said, look, I can't get a hold of the White House. They've gone dark. Those were his words. They've gone dark. So it appears, as we stand right now, that Donald Trump has left vaccine-injured parents, people looking for answers to this, and the rest of the population hanging in the wind. And I'd like to add that in America, and this is true if you look across the world too, because it's happening, but in America, there is sweeping legislation that is only gaining momentum. Because of the measles, started with the measles. That was in Washington last January. And the conversation was, well, we're going to have to mandate just the measles shot, just the MMR shot, because we got to stop this measles. That turned into about 134 separate bills across over 40 states in the United States to mandate all vaccines in perpetuity, to remove parental consent from families, so children can make their own decision with vaccination. And it even says these things. I've been following this. This is a whole separate topic of the medical community trying to take our children. But there's bills in Washington, D.C. and also in Massachusetts. They're basically saying, and this is written in the bill, that children can make their own informed consent for vaccination and that doesn't have to tell the parents. How young, Jeffrey? Is there a cutoff point? Does the child have to be 12 or 13, or how does it work? Here's the big deal here. And this should be on everyone's front page. No age limit. Oh, no age limit. I watched the hearings, again, in Washington, D.C. for their bill, and that was asked, credit where credit's due, to the legislators. They said, we're trying to wrap our head around this. We're trying to get an age limit. Do you have an idea of an age limit? And every one of them, as if they were told talking points, said, we think it should be up to the doctor. The doctors are trained to give informed consent. They do this every day. They should be the best judge of this. So even the American Medical Association, although it's a trade group and it's funded by big pharma money and so on and so forth, even the American Medical Association is throwing its full weight behind this agenda. So people have to ask themselves, okay, does the flu shot work? Does it not work? Great, that's a conversation. But hey, how about having your kids make your own decisions for vaccination at any age, according to whatever Jeffrey. The doctor.
That's staggering stuff. When Jeffrey Jaxen tells you something, dear listener, you can take it to the bank. He's a really good journalist, and he's got a great reputation. And he doesn't risk his reputation by using conjecture. He's telling you the truth. This is happening. And it's important that you know about it because it's coming here. They're trying to bring it in here. JeffreyJaxen.com. I've had a tweet from Tiger Johnson. And Jeffrey, Tiger has retweeted something from Lotus Oak. I don't want to put you on the spot, my friend. I know you've got a big old brain on you, but I don't expect you to know everything. But I've just been sent a chart that appears to claim that pre-1960 or around 1960, the mortality rate for measles in your great country was about 2 in a million. And that's before the vaccination started. And after the vaccinations began, that mortality rate did increase somewhat. Now, you probably will have, well, I'm sure, but maybe you haven't. You're not expected to know everything. But that, if that is true, and I can't verify that, that's amazing, really.
Well, there's a lot of amazing people in this movement. If anybody has a question on that, Suzanne Humphreys, you may have had her on your show, you may not have.
Yeah, I know Suzanne, it's a couple of years, but yeah, again, through you, my friend, you put me in touch with these people over the years, you see. I wouldn't have ever met her without your assistance. Go ahead anyway, I cut across you there.
Oh, no, absolutely. She is an amazing researcher, amazing fighter, speaker. She has written a book, Dissolving Illusions, and it's the forgotten history of vaccines and disease. So when they say vaccines are the greatest health accomplishment in the 20th century, this book shows the statistics and the studies and the numbers to show otherwise. It shows that measles and a lot of these diseases that were hailed, vaccines ended them, were on the decline before the vaccines even became into widespread circulation. It's a stunning read, and it resets. I think every medical student should read it because it puts vaccines in their proper place, which is a tool, just like anything else in a doctor's bag or whatever, or on their shelves or their desks. Yeah. But it's a tool with harms, just like anything. In the United States here, we're dealing with an opioid epidemic, which we have been for about almost 2 decades now. It's killed nearly as many people as World War II. We're on the level of about 400,000 people. And this is just another product of a pharmaceutical industry, Johnson & Johnson, Purdue Pharma, who just went bankrupt. It's staggering that people can't wrap their minds around. The vaccines are just another for-profit product of a notoriously criminal pharmaceutical industry. I mean, I say criminal. If you look at their histories, they've committed some egregious crimes, and a lot of those they get to pay their way out of. 100 million here, a couple billion there. But look at the history. Look at the history of Bayer from World War I, or from Monsanto, or Merck. Let's talk about recent history. Merck, they had Vioxx.
Vioxx. Yeah.
Yes, we've covered that. So many people like to point to this when they talk about the vaccine conversation, rightfully so. That killed 50 to 100,000 plus people before they took it off the market. But my point of bringing this up is they had discovery emails. Now, this is something we can't get with vaccinations. We can't get court discovery because we can't take these vaccine manufacturers to court to get their emails and their internal memos and their studies. So we can't tell what they're doing on the inside. Now, Merck, which is a major vaccine manufacturer, had this to say. 1999 emails show the company execs were complaining about doctors who disliked Vioxx. And they said, quote, "We may need to seek them out and destroy them where they live." They created a list of doctors, their names, and labels next to their names that said, quote, "neutralize" or "discredit," and so on and so forth. Monsanto has done the same thing. It just came out about 6 months ago that Monsanto had a fusion center. That's a military term that they tracked activists that didn't like their products, namely Roundup, a glyphosate-based Roundup herbicide. They were tracking Neil Young. They were yes, that's the musician because he put out an album called The Monsanto Years. They were trying to find out how to discredit him or possibly sue him. They were tracking a journalist named Carrie Gillum, who has written about a longtime writer about that stuff. So this is corporate. This is how they do it. This is how they do it.
And they're famous for it. And again, I can't impeach any of that. You're absolutely right there. I want to ask you this. Before we talk a little bit about Vaxxed too, I want to hear what's going on with that, because the word on it is that it is terrific, and it's going to be, again, a blockbuster. It's going to open people's eyes maybe in a way that will even blow away the first film, and I know you know all about it, so we'll come to that in a minute. Is there a divide, do you think, is there a divide in the doctor community between older doctors and younger doctors? I get a sense that there is still, that if you get GPs that are in their 60s, 70s, practicing, general practitioners, medical doctors, qualified, as opposed to younger ones, the older ones are more inclined to be sceptical about giving so many vaccines to children. That's my understanding. Is that what you found, Jeffrey, over the years in your investigations?
Well, because yes and no. Because of the climate, it's very interesting to try to research this, because I've likened this climate to totalitarian regimes of the past, the Soviet Union, even, it's brought up all the time, but Nazi Germany, even the civil rights movement. There's parallels. I'm not saying one is more important than the other or whatever, but there's a lot of parallels between this. For instance, in the Soviet Union, everyone kind of knew that they were under the rule of thumb by the government. It's kind of a wink and a nod, and you played the role, but behind the scenes, you disrupted in the little ways and the little spheres that you could. And that's what I've found with the medical community. Some are more outspoken, obviously. You have doctors a lot more now, and this is when we talk about these documentaries, Vax 2, and all these people, including your show, everyone that speaks out. Every time we do this, we pave a road for other people to speak out within the system that have courage to do it. And not everyone's going to do that. That's fine. But there are pediatricians that now offer slower schedules, so we don't give all the vaccines at once. For some of these kids are more vulnerable than others, so that's what they suggest. And some pediatricians don't. If the people don't want to vaccinate, that's fine. Now, legislation is coming down hard upon them, so the government obviously doesn't want that to happen. But it's more of like a internal disruption for a lot of people. I talked to, this is a famous story I tell all the time. I talked to people in a emergency room, and they said, in the hospitals, they're required to take the flu shots. They're required to take a lot of shots because they come in contact with the public. And they say, our doctor just signs off, our head doctor just signs off that we all took it.
Wow.
None of us take it.
And they haven't taken it.
And they have not taken it because it's totally ineffective. When it comes, they say instead of taking the flu, if you want to take the flu shot, you put a mask on. But in court cases, they rule that the mask is totally ineffective against some of these viruses because the barrier is not small enough to filter out these viruses. So it's an interesting thing when it comes to that. But that's just an example. I know a lot of other examples of stuff that happens. But right now, it's still a little behind the scenes. And as evidenced by Bill Maher, people have careers, doctors have careers, and I am not saying this as an excuse. I think any doctor that sees vaccine injury and keeps their mouth shut or doesn't report it, shame on you. I hope you're judged to the fullest extent at some point in your life. But that's what's happening, and a lot of people, whether it's Hollywood people or medical doctors or people within the government, they choose their career when they see things. I like to say there's 2 points here: you either know or you don't know the information. When you find out the information, the truth of the information, you have a choice at that point. You either act or you don't act. So there's a lot of people that know the information but don't act. So we're at an interesting point in time. But the more we talk about this stuff, there seems to be some kind of zeitgeist here we're hitting. Where, South Park, the animated show here, and that's really popular in the U.S., did a whole show, their 300 episode on vaccines. And it's a pretty funny episode if anybody hasn't seen it. But the fact that people, it's entering popular culture, so to speak, is a really interesting place, from where we've come, just even talking to you over the last couple of years. Yeah, that's great news, Jeffrey. It's coming up for 5 minutes to the top of the hour. Just before we go, you do work obviously very closely with Del Bigtree, the producer of Vaxxed.
on the Highwire show, which is, again, I recommend people check it out. I'm sure many of our listeners will know all about it. But if you don't, check it out. And Jeffery is a significant contributor and producer of the Highwire. So tell us about Vaxxed 2 then. What can people expect, Jeffery, when they get to see it? A lot of people are very excited about it.
Well, I definitely don't want to do the PR campaign for it because I'm not involved in the movie whatsoever. But I can say, in all honesty, I have it loaded up to watch this afternoon. So as soon as I get off with you, I'll be watching that and probably providing, more of a review on it. But from what I know, I don't want to be a hypocrite like most of the media and say don't watch this, but we never watched it. But you don't watch it because it's dangerous.
Yeah.
I'm gonna say that it tells the stories of the people by the people, and this is perhaps the most important thing because you don't get a filter, you don't get a government filter, you don't get a medical study claiming to strike a conclusion or strike a this is why this happens. You don't get the filters of funding from institutions or pharmaceutical companies that reflect on the outcome. It's directly from the parents, and as you know from interviewing the parents, they have some compelling stories to tell, and they're very, very similar. And these can be looked at as witnesses to a crime, to a medical crime. And if the witnesses to the crime are all saying the same essential thing, shouldn't we be looking at this a little more? Shouldn't we be doing the studies? Shouldn't we be looking at? we have this thing called the Vaccine Safety Data Link here. It's a computer system, has all the vaccine information from everybody in the large healthcare organizations in the United States here. All they have to do is push some buttons and run some numbers to see who's healthier, vaccinated or unvaccinated. And they won't do that. So that has to tell you something. And I think they know the time's up. And this is why we're seeing such an aggressive push on this in the laws and the media. So Vax 2 is, these documentaries they send out ripple effects into the consciousness, into the hearts and minds of people. And when you see some of this stuff, the Vietnam War, in the last thing I'll say, I'm sorry, I'm going on a rant.
Not at all. This is good, Jeffery. Crack on. This is good.
The Vietnam War, here in the United States, was highly contested by the population because we did not want to. We just got out of World War II a couple decades before that. We did not want to get into another war. There was protests in the streets. Look up Kent State. There was the killings of college students because they were protesting. It was really a crazy time here. And one of the big things that stopped that war was the media started showing kids coming home in body bags.
Yeah, that's right.
They started showing the damage this war was doing. It wasn't just, the U.S. is out there spreading democracy to the Vietnamese. So when I look at these parents telling these stories, I'm looking at almost like a similar version of war reporting. These children are harmed, and they're telling their story because the media will not tell these stories. As you know, I've talked to some parents in Ireland that sit down with the media. They're promised a fair shake, a fair go, and it's an immediate hit piece for hours and hours, and it's edited to discredit them. Nasty stuff the media is doing right now. So if you want a real story, listen to the parents. Listen to the parents, because they're telling a realer story than you'll ever get from the corporate media, because they're funded. I'm sorry, but they're funded by big pharma money, a lot of them.
Brilliant, Jeffery. What you summed up there, I couldn't even dream of adding to that. You're bang on. After Vietnam, they decided to embed journalists with the military so they could control the story, but then they also decided to buy the media organisations, and that's what they did. Swallowed up small town newspapers and radio stations. They've done it all across Europe as well, and that's why we get one side and one side only. Brilliant to have you back on the programme. You should come back more often. You don't need to wait to be asked, by the way. I'm looking forward to seeing Vaxxed 2 as well. Pass on our congratulations to your friend Del Bigtree about that, and hopefully we'll get him on this programme in the next couple of weeks to talk about the film as well. Godspeed, Jeffery. JefferyJaxen.com, folks. Real journalism. Cheers, my friend. Speak again real soon.
All right, keep up the great work, Richie.
Thanks, Jeffery. That was Jeffery Jaxen live from Massachusetts this afternoon on the Richie Allen Show. Really good guy. I thought Jeffery was involved in the production of Vaxxed, so I apologise for giving out that little bit of incorrect information. I assumed that because he works very closely with Del Bigtree, but no, he didn't participate in the production of the film, but as I said, he works closely with Del on the Highwire podcast. It's pretty much the top of the hour I'm going to try something. Maybe I shouldn't, but I'm going to try it anyway. There's a lot of trends. There's a trend. There is a Twitter trend right now. And it's been going on for about 3 or 4 hours. And it's about an NBC reporter, I believe, called, what's her name? Amy Robach. ABC, Amy Robach. And apparently, Amy Robach, last August, so 3 months ago, was hot mic'd. Now, hot mic means you are a presenter on a television or radio program and you are speaking and you think that you are off air. Right? You think you're off air, but you're not. You are, but you are being recorded. And here is ABC's Amy Robach, hot mic'd, not realising she's being recorded, speaking about Jeffrey Epstein, billionaire financier and paedophile. And this little bit of audio was grabbed, as I said, back in August. I've not pre-listened to it, but I'm going to play it anyway. I know. And apparently Project Veritas have put this out, so let's have a wee listen, shall we?
I've had the story for 3 years. I've had this interview with Virginia Roberts.
She said she has had the story for 3 years and an interview with Virginia Roberts. Have a listen. Yeah, there you are.
I've had the story for 3 years. I've had this interview with Virginia Roberts. We would not put it on the air. First of all, I was told, who's Jeffrey Epstein? No one knows who that is. This is a stupid story. Then the palace found out that we had her whole allegations about Prince Andrew and threatened us in a million different ways. We were so afraid we wouldn't be able to interview Kate and Will that also quashed the story. And then Alan Dershowitz was also implicated in it because of the planes. She told me everything. She had pictures. She had everything. She was in hiding for 12 years. We convinced her to come out. We convinced her to talk to us. It was unbelievable what we had. Clinton. We had everything. I tried for 3 years to get it on, to no avail, and now it's all coming out, and it's like these new revelations, and I freaking had all of it. I'm so pissed right now. Like, every day I get more and more pissed because I'm just like, oh my God, what we had was unreal. Other women backing it up. Hey, yep. Brad Edwards, the attorney, 3 years ago, saying there will come a day when we will realize Jeffrey Epstein was the most prolific pedophile this country has ever known. And I had it all 3 years ago.
ABC News anchor Amy Robach caught on microphone. This is put out by Project Veritas. Caught on the mic 3 months ago, saying they had the whole thing on Epstein, Clinton. She mentioned Alan Dershowitz, the lawyer, travelling on planes, the whole lot of it, and they wouldn't go with it. They wouldn't touch it. Well, it's hardly surprising, is it? We will be returning to the Epstein story, of course, in the coming days and weeks. This is your Richie Allen Show. There is none like it. Europe's most listened to independent radio show. I'm going to take a very brief interlude. When we come back, don't forget Jim Fetzer returns to the Richie Allen radio show. Jim will be with me in a few minutes' time. You don't want to miss that. And again, if there's something you'd like to put to Jim or to me, you know how to do it. You tweet it.
Renowned healer Mark Bayersky travels the world to find the most unique and powerful crystals for self-healing. Since the ancient times, crystals have been used as healing tools. They hold a natural healing vibration and are highly charged in positive energy. Mark teaches how to channel the universal energy and transfer it to the crystal to activate its healing power. Each crystal is used for its unique ability to target a different physical or emotional challenge. Mark Bayersky is an author, healer, speaker, and founder of the Pure Energy Healing Academy. He shares powerful messages of inspiration and healing on his daily YouTube videos, reaching millions worldwide. Mark's crystals, healing oils, and incense sticks are most sought after by other healers. His collection is available online at www.markbayersky.com. His work is presented through Lemon House, a company that creates and curates consciously made gifts.
Now, there were a lot of comments on vaccines. Lots and lots and lots of comments came in when Jeffery was chatting with me a few minutes ago. To read them, just go to twitter.com. Where it says search Twitter, put Richie Allen Show, all one word in. without any spaces, so no spaces, Richie Allen Show. Press enter and you'll see what everybody else was tweeting. And if you feel like it, you can then engage others and chat with them, so long as you argue your case without resorting to silliness and name calling. Yeah? Yeah. If I can do it, you can do it. Right? All right. Oh, yeah. We're talking Sandy Hook and Jim Fetzer's defamation case with Lenny Posner next. Right, music from Stevie Wonder on the Richie Allen Show. Love that song. 8 minutes it is. Well, it's 8.5 minutes past the hour. Welcome back to the programme. Really interesting stuff from Jefferey, Jaxen in hour 1. Now, we were dismayed to learn about 3 weeks ago that an old friend of the programme's, Jim Fetzer, Jim will join me in a minute, lost his defamation case with Lenny Posner. Well, we knew a summary judgment had gone against Jim a few months ago. The sentencing phase of that was 3 weeks ago, and the jury awarded $450,000 in damages to Lenny Posner. Lot of problems with this I have. The first one being that a summary judgment was entered against Jim Fetzer back in the summer. For those of you who don't know the legalese, a summary judgment is basically when a judgment is entered by the court, by the judge hearing the case without hearing a full trial. Okay? That's not good, I don't think. That's not justice, whatever you think. And we talked to Kevin Barrett, longtime friend and collaborator of Jim Fetzer's, last week. Kevin, of course, was at the sentencing hearing of that trial. He was there for his friend in the gallery observing it, and he wasn't happy with the way it went down either. Let's welcome back to the programme the author, the broadcaster, the academic, my old friend Jim Fetzer. Jim, welcome back to our programme. How you doing?
Oh, terrific. Richie, I'm so glad you're having me back to talk about this. Just to add a clarification on summary judgment, a judge is only permitted to render a summary judgment when there are no disputed facts. However, the authenticity of the death certificate, which I had described in the book as a fabrication, remained in dispute. It turned out to have, it had no file number, it had no town certification, it had no state certification, which means on its face it was fraudulent, because in Connecticut, not even parents are allowed to have death certificates that are uncertified. But in addition, the death certificate attached to the original complaint had both a file number, a town certification, a state certification, and yet the complaint insisted there were no material differences. That means no legally relevant differences between the two documents, when obviously the file number, the town certification, and the state certification were material differences. In my opinion, therefore, this lawsuit was a legal absurdity from the beginning. But Richie, get this. During the course of discovery, 2 other death certificates surfaced. One, Dave Gahary obtained from the town. Another, I obtained from the state. And in submitting my response to their summary judgment motion, I included the reports of 2 forensic document examiners. One, a fellow named Larry Wickstrom from Minnesota, the other A.P. Ash Robertson from California, both of whom concluded that all 4, not just the one, but all 4 death certificates that had surfaced during this case were fabrications. You would have thought that would have put a halt to this entire charade, but instead the judge just set them aside as someone else's opinions and went ahead and ruled anyway, even though obviously, blatantly, the authenticity of the death certificate remained in dispute, and under those circumstances, the resolution of the authenticity question had to be sent to a jury. So there was a colossal blunder committed by the court in this case, Richie, in finding me liable.
So you believe it was sorry, Jim, so you believe it was a blunder. You don't believe it's anything more suspicious. Let me just remind our listeners, this is important. What Jim is saying there is really important to understand. As a journalist, I've been I've witnessed a couple of libel cases over the years, defamation cases. I've witnessed them. And it's very important that if somebody is accused of defamation or of libel, for example, I might be on the radio show someday and I might say something about a politician. And that politician might say, as would be his or her right, Richie Allen has libelled me, I am going to sue him. Now, what should happen is I get to explain in a court of law why it is that I said the thing I said about the politician. That's justice. Jim Fetzer, whatever you think about Jim, whatever you think about Sandy Hook, was not given that opportunity to say to the state, to the people, to the jury, all right, I accept Mr. Posner is suing me. Here is how I reached my conclusion. You didn't get a chance to do that. That is not justice. By any stretch of the imagination.
I did not have the opportunity to do that before a jury, Richie, which would have been the right thing to do. I repeated this in my many filings and briefings before the judge. So the judge well knew what I'd emphasized, my grounds for my conclusion. And indeed, during the oral hearing on the summary judgment, I had a written prepared statement which I amplified upon, but where the judge had me introduce the statement that reviewed all of the facts we've just been discussing here, where I conceded that a couple of the reasons I had for concluding it was a fabrication in the book had been mistaken, including a variation in type, fonts, and sizes, because it turns out there are three different parties who make out a death certificate. The medical examiner fills out the cause of death, the funeral director about the burial, and then the town registrar puts it all together and gives a town registration. It turns out I did not know at the time there were three different parties, which account for the difference in the fonts and sizes, or that the blank form had a shaded portion where the medical examiner fills out his content, so that some of the reasons I had for concluding that it was a fabrication were wrong. But now, during the course of the research, even better reasons for concluding it was a fabrication emerged, which I think ought to have made the case a slam dunk that I had committed no defamation, because in libel cases, truth is an absolute defense.
Of course.
Let me also mention, Richie, I only described the death certificate as a fabrication. Now, there's widespread publication in the mainstream media that was fostered by the plaintiffs that I had claimed that Leonard Posner had faked the death certificate. That was not my position.
Well, you never said that to me. Now, to be fair to you, and I've known you for years, I'm very fair, me. I've always been fair, even when I disagree with people. I want to amplify that. I've never heard you say that. I never heard you say that the dad fabricated the birth certificate. To your credit, I've never heard you say that.
Well, it's not my opinion. This was a very large-scale operation. The CIA is an expert in document fabrication. This was a Barack Obama, Joe Biden, Eric Holder, Daniel Malloy, Connecticut State Police operation with parents having been brought in to seed the community. They faked the children using the photographs. One of the oddities at the time, Richie, was that the medical examiner declared that they didn't allow the parents to view the bodies, but rather identified them on the basis of photographs.
Yeah.
That was very, very odd, because as a parent myself, there's no force on earth that would inhibit me from viewing the body of a child of mine had I been told of a death. And yet, it turns out that was a part of the key to the ingenuity of the whole deception, because they used photograph of older children when they were younger to be the victims. In fact, Noah Posner is a fiction made up of photographs of Michael Wagner, who's supposed to be his older stepbrother. Michael Wagner, alive and well, graduated from the University of Connecticut at Storrs, residing somewhere in Connecticut, to the best of my knowledge, was the source. Mona Alexis Presley, who's done brilliant work on Sandy Hook, has good reasons for concluding that, in fact, some of the parents used photographs of themselves as children to be the deceased children at Sandy Hook. I mean, the cynicism involved here and the brazen blatant way they were manipulating the public for political purposes, Richie, is just dumbfounding.
Let's save a little bit of time here. And when I say save a bit of time, I wouldn't ever give you the brush off. You can stay on till the end of the show, you know that. Well, when I say save a bit of time, I championed the book when it came out in 2015. You sent it to me, and I read it. And I said then, and I say now, it's an excellent read, and you do a terrific job of going through the very many strange anomalies, abnormalities, bizarre coincidences and twists. I've always said that. I would never dare to patronise you. You're too bright for me to be doing that. And I've had many conversations with you over the years, probably for over 10 years now, where you and I have had grown-up conversations about various shootings and about various terrorist attacks, some that we've found very suspicious, others that we thought, might have happened, and so on. We've always done that. I have no problem with the book. I have no problem acknowledging that you never accused Lenny Posner of faking the death certificate. And I believe it should be your right as an American. Even if you're an Irishman, an Englishman, it's your right. If you think something is grievously wrong, you should be able to look into that and to write about it, and not to be hounded by people saying that you're out to offend or upset or hurt the families. I believe your motivation for writing the book was pure, and because I read it, and I believe reading the book, it left me very disturbed. Where you and I have had a disagreement, and it's only on one small area. And I'm not going to get into this. That's why I said we could save a bit of time. I don't want to get into you and me acting like two stags in the New Forest, Fetzer. There's no need for that today. But I was just going to say, I'm not convinced that nobody died or that some of these parents aren't genuine. And that's all it is. And that's where and that's all I'm going to say on that. And it's my only... Well, go ahead, Jim.
Well, let me address that, Richie, because remember... The book is an edited book. This is another false claim promulgated by the mainstream media. It's very, it's not unreasonable to suppose if a couple of people, and they claim Mike Palachuk and I, who were the editors of the book, where Mike was the series editor and I the book editor, meaning I brought together all the contributors, organized the contents, was responsible for the placing of every image in every article in the book. Just if two of us had just authored a book, we might make a mistake that could be as serious as this. But what I did was to bring together the best experts on Sandy Hook, 13 experts, including 6 current or retired PhD professors. Now, Richie, we, in our collaborative research, concluded that the school had been closed by 2008. It was loaded with asbestos and other biohazards, damaged by hurricane. There even turned out to be a major flood in the area in 2007. There were no students there.
And by the way, sorry to interrupt you. I'm going to get hammered by your supporters for interrupting you, but I'm going to do it anyway because I want to acknowledge something. You have got email evidence, correspondence between senior people there discussing the moving of the students from the Sandy Hook Elementary School elsewhere, Jim. I've seen this. I don't doubt this. You see, I'm not trying to tear you down or embarrass you. I couldn't do that. I acknowledge that this is crazy shit. It really disturbs me. It disturbs me,
Richie, you're actually talking about more recent research by Wolfgang Halbig, where he's discovered that they were administratively carrying Sandy Hook Elementary on the books, but actually making food deliveries and so forth to Chalk Hill Middle School, which had been abandoned in a nearby community about 15 minutes drive away. So that's a subsequent level of confirmation of the results of our research. The point I was driving at is the following. That when you have 6 PhDs and 7 other experts all converging on the same conclusion, the probability that we're wrong becomes extremely small. For example, suppose a PhD were to make a mistake 1 time in 10. Well, if you have 6 PhDs, the improbability is 1 in 10 times 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 1 in 10, or 1 in a million. Not only that, and that's an absurdly high figure to suppose that a PhD would make a scholarly mistake 1 time in 10, because you couldn't have earned a PhD, which is a certification of your qualifications to conduct original research, if you were that incompetent.
Right, I agree with that. I agree with that, but let me jump in there. I agree. Why would they waste the time with that sort of elaborate production? Why, Jim? It is easier, Jim, and you know this, my friend, it is easier to manipulate a guy, to mind control a man using medication, and to get him to kill some children. It is much easier to do that. And let me finish now, and I'll give you the floor for as long as you want. And it would have a much deeper impact on society, Jim, because those parents would be real, their grief would be real, the community. I've never had a satisfactory answer to this. Why not just kill a load of kiddies? Why?
Because they discovered after 9/11 that when you actually kill people, they have family and loved ones who don't take it kindly. They pursue lawsuits. They make a big deal about it. Bush and Cheney tried for 441 days to forestall organizing a 9/11 commission. But the Jersey girls, 4 widows of men who had died on 9/11, made it politically impossible for them to continue. Let me give you some more signs that this, so they found it easier to just fake it. You pay people off. There are no lawsuits. In fact, that's one of the anomalies about Sandy Hook. Real shootings tend to be followed in close proximity with a lot of lawsuits by parents insisting that proper procedures weren't maintained, sufficient safety wasn't conducted, and so forth. That did not happen in Sandy Hook.
Are you telling me that not a single parent has filed a civil suit against the state? Not one.
Now that we've made a point of it, we had a more recent, but I mean, we're talking about years and years later. What is it now? This is 2019. The shooting took place 7 years ago. For at least 5 years, Richie, there were no lawsuits. Now, they fabricated some against Remington, for example, the rifle manufacturer, which is completely absurd. This is as though you could sue Buick because an automobile of that make was involved in a hit and run. I mean, the idea of suing Remington for manufacturing the AR-15 is completely ludicrous. But let me follow it up, Richie. You're talking about a hypothetical of what they might have done. They might have had someone who was, somewhat demented, manipulated, is shooting up a bunch of kids in a school.
They've done it before. They've done it before, Jim.
Yeah. Richie, look, they could have done it. That's just not what they did here. We even had another, not one of the 6 PhDs, but another expert, Paul Preston. He has his own radio show called Agenda 21. Paul is a school administrator who's actually supervised active shooter drills. He was so troubled by what he saw broadcast from Newtown that day that he reached out to his contacts in the Obama Department of Education, all of whom confirmed to him it had been a drill, that no students had been harmed, and it was done to promote gun control. That's coming from the Obama Department of Education, Richie. That's right in the book. Not only that, but we discovered there were a lot of very odd events on the ground that made sense once you understood what we were talking about was a 2-day event, a 2-day FEMA exercise, where we had a sign, everyone must check in.
Madness.
Now, have you ever heard of a crime scene where there's a sign?
Hang on a second. If there's one bit of criticism I'm going to level at you, and I think I'll get away with it because I've known you for years. And I love you. I really do. I think you're a great guy, and you've got a brain the size of Wisconsin. One of the things that I'm surprised at you, because you're a very good broadcaster, you've got this shotgun scattergun delivery. First of all, you're not on Fox News anymore. You're on the Richie Allen Show, so you've got plenty of time to go through these things one by one. But you go from one to another, and the listener's like, Jesus, hang on, what did he just say there? Let's stay with this, because this definitely supports your case. Let's talk about this bizarre sign that was pictured, that you made a big deal of, and your contributors did in the book No One Died at Sandy Hook. This sign, everyone must check in. Nobody can give me an earthly explanation as to why that sign would be there. I agree with you. Tell us more about that. Remind our listeners.
Well, Richie, we discovered the FEMA manual, which I published in the book, right, as Appendix A. And it says right in the manual, everyone must check in with a controller upon arrival. So it was reminding the participants they needed to check in with a controller. They had porta potties already in place. Would you believe Wolfgang Halbig asked the innocuous question, who delivered the porta potties, and they wouldn't let him know. Why? Because they were delivered on the 13th or even the 12th before the alleged shooting on the 14th. Besides, who has porta potties at a crime scene? They were providing pizza and bottled water at the firehouse. Again, have you ever heard of a crime scene where they provided pizza and bottled water? There were lots of people there who had name tags on lanyards. Well, that's how FEMA identifies their players, with color-coded name tags on lanyards. Parents were bringing children to the scene. Richie, I'm sure you'll agree, no parent would bring a child to the scene of a child shooting massacre. But this was the rehearsal. This was the day before, and they were treating it as a festive occasion. To return to the sign specifically, Richie, Wolfgang Halbig, in pursuit of his FOIA requests, which Connecticut was denying, they weren't answering his phone calls, they weren't returning his requests. He was astonished to find a couple of homicide detectives from the local precinct on his porch in a gated community in Florida, telling him they were there on behalf of the Connecticut State Police, and if he didn't stop asking questions about Sandy Hook, he would be prosecuted. Have you ever heard of anything like that?
No.
Wolfgang became very tenacious, and during one of the hearings, these are formal legal hearings where the witnesses were appearing under oath. Patricia LaLorda, who was the first selectman of Newtown, that's a position equivalent to mayor, testified under oath that the sign had been placed there not by Newtown, but by the Department of Homeland Security, which officially had nothing to do with anything. But of course, FEMA is a branch within the Department of Homeland Security. This was a FEMA capstone event. It involves the whole community. Communities are paid millions of dollars of taxpayer money to conduct these events, and then they go silent about how they're portrayed in the press. That's the way it's being done, Richie.
They go silent. Yeah.
Sophia was the very first to point out that this was a capstone event in her marvelous documentary, Sandy Hook, in 2, 3, 4, and 5 dimensions.
I like Sophia Smallstorm. Yeah, I've gotten to know Sophia over the years as well. What I'm going to say next, you're going to want to throttle me, Jim, but I'm going to say it anyway. I still believe Lenny Posner. Now, don't jump down my throat. Let me tell you why. I've listened and watched, and despite your many, many skills, my friend, let me tell you, I've been an interviewer, I've been a presenter and a producer at every level of the game for many years. I don't big myself up, I don't build myself up, and I don't claim to be a genius. But I know people intimately. I know people's tells. I know when people are being deceptive. Let me tell you this, Jim. If Lenny Posner is lying about losing a son, however he lost him, he's better than Gregory Peck, he's better than Marlon Brando, than Jimmy Cagney and Tom Cruise all rolled into one. And this is what this keeps me up at nights, because I believe what you're telling me about this bizarre, ridiculous, crazy, lunatic scenario. I believe you. And I had the first English interview with Wolfgang Halbig 6.5 years ago. Couldn't believe it. This state trooper. I believed him as well. But I believe Lenny Posner is telling the truth. Help me out.
Well, Richie, look. Leonard Posner surprisingly showed up for his video deposition right here in Madison. It was 7 hours long. The attorney for the book publisher, Dave Gahary, questioned him for 5 hours. Then I questioned him for an hour and a half. Then the attorney, Reed Peterson by name, did the last half hour.
Tell me about, hang on.
During my hour and a half, Richie, I caught him in a minimum of 3 very major lies. I caught him. It's on videotape. I can prove it. So your idea that this man is a sincere truth teller is easily refuted. I'll give you one of the illustrations. Tony Meade, who was a subject of Posner's attacks very early on, like in 2014, Leonard Posner was attacking Tony Meade because he was very active among the Sandy Hook skeptics. And Tony discovered that Leonard Posner had accumulated 24 URLs of domain names that were identified for skeptics, wolfganghalbig.com, jamesfetzer.com, tonymead.com, like that. So I asked him, I said, I was very curious about these name tags. How did you happen to accumulate them? And he said, with utter sincerity, it would appear, oh, he was just collecting them to resell them. And I said, oh, that's very interesting, because when I discovered that you had one for me, I looked at it And there he had a 30-page document about me, most of which was true, entitled James Fetzer, A Life of Insanity. Here he was, just as calm, cool as could be, under oath, testifying falsely. Why in God's name would Leonard Posner be collecting domain names for Sandy Hook critics unless he was going to use it to attack them, just as he was attacking me? Now, I had downloaded that document, and I have it now. And it will surface at some point if this case goes on, and it looks as though it's going on. I mean, I'm going to be filing the appeal. The case isn't technically final until the 19th of December. My attorney has just submitted several motions that would lead to the summary judgment being vacated and the necessity for a new beginning of the entire case, Richie. But I'm telling you, the guy's a convincing liar. Now, Dave Gahary seems to have drawn the very same conclusion, he being the publisher. When the book, Nobody Died at Sandy Hook, was published on the 22nd of October 2015, it had sold nearly 500 copies when Amazon banned it on the 19th of November.
I remember.
So Mike and I realized we had to have our own outlet, our own mode of distribution, so we founded Moon Rock Books. And we basically gave it to Dave Gahary, who had an umbrella organization called Wrongs Without Remedies, within which it would fit as a legal entity. Now, Dave Gahary somehow, during all this exchange with Leonard Posner, became convinced, just as you have become convinced, that Leonard Posner lost a son. But Dave Gahary has said to me, nobody has asked him yet where Leonard lost a son. I'm convinced Dave Gahary believes both. Sandy Hook was a complete fraud, but that somehow independently Leonard Posner may have lost a son. Whatever that may be, I was being sued about a death certificate, a specific document.
Right, that's important. Can we stay with that?
Document.
Hang on, Jim. Hang on. Let me back in. Thanks for giving me a chance to come back in. I really appreciate that. Thank you, because that's the paradox. I agree with Dave. And I'm not obtuse, Jim, and I'm not scared of anybody. I'm not scared of some gentleman in the United States. If I thought the man was lying, I would say so. I've got various interest groups here in the UK trying to destroy my radio program. I'm not scared of anybody. My integrity is all I have. And I'm not sitting on the fence here. I understand where you're coming from with all the points that you make about the scene the day before and on the day. Everything you've described, I find it compelling. And I'm not going to explain again why I find Posner to be compelling. I'm fascinated by your meeting with him. I'm really fascinated by it. You mentioned him buying up the domain names. Now, don't jump down my throat. It is a plausible possibility that he's that fucking pissed off with everybody. He's had people all over the world coming at him, telling him he's a liar. That maybe, that can be explained as to why he might be fighting back. I'm not saying that is the case, but I'm just putting that possibility out there. What was the atmosphere like in the room when you were there with Leonard Posner? It can't have been comfortable.
Well, it depends when you mean. I don't have any special animosity toward Leonard Posner. I regard him as the linchpin of censorship on the internet. He has... it's fascinating, Richie, how we had the determination of liability, and the only matter for the jury to decide was the amount of damages. Okay? Terrible. I was being sued for $1 million in damages. Well, they were making the argument. They had an expert witness who had never actually met Leonard Posner face to face, was doing his diagnosis based on hearsay, and an hour or so conversation with Leonard Posner over the phone, where he rendered the following opinion: that Leonard Posner would have recovered from the PTSD induced by the death of his son at Sandy Hook had it not been for a few sentences in this book of mine in which I describe the death certificate he shared with my colleague Kelly Watt as a fabrication. Now, think about it. You can overcome the trauma induced by the death of your son in a mass shooting, and you're going to have a perfectly normal, relatively normal life thereafter, but for a few sentences in a book that he actually admits he never even read. Leonard Posner never even read my book. So how did he even come to find it? There was some effort going on to figure out how to target me. because I'd been too successful in bringing together all these experts. We had a massive evidence. They want to do what they could to discredit our findings. And they had to really plan this out for years in advance, how they could fabricate a case against me that was just as phony as a death certificate. And by the way, this is not just my opinion, but it's obvious on its face. The death certificate he gave to Kelly Watt has no file number. It has no town certification. It has no state certification, completely unlike the death certificate attached to the complaint, which had all of the above.
Now, Jim, let's stay with this. When this was put to Leonard Posner in the deposition, that the birth certificate is a mishmash, and you contended that it wasn't a genuine document, what was his response to that?
Well, I showed him a variety of the death certificates that had surfaced. Remember, altogether, 4 had surfaced, and then his attorney introduced yet a 5th at the summary judgment. And I was asking him about these, and this is very, very interesting. Both to Reed Peterson during the oral deposition, he confirmed with regard to Exhibit D, and with regard to me, my Exhibit FFF, that this was a death certificate he'd shared with Kelly Watt. That's extremely important, Richie. He was admitting the copy that was published in the book was the one he'd shared with Kelly Watt under oath. Now, at the time of the oral hearing, his attorney argued that we had just found this death certificate willy-nilly on the internet. He claimed that the one that Leonard had posted had a town certification and a file number when it did not. He claimed that we had edited it, but yet, you see, there's a gross discrepancy here right at the heart of the matter, because Leonard Posner had also introduced an affidavit claiming that this new 5th death certificate was the one he'd posted on the internet, and it's false. It contradicts Kelly's affidavit and his prior admission that the death certificate we published was the very one he shared with Kelly Watt. They were doing some fancy 2-step here, Richie. It's really fascinating.
You know what's tragic about it is when it came to court. If we put my opinion about Leonard Posner to one side and forget about it, when it came to court, the summary judgment was a disgrace. You said it was a mistake. I think you were being kind in describing it as a mistake. When, in a case of this high-profile nature, you were denied access to proper justice, to right and proper justice, because you, as the person being sued, you should have every right, and your legal team should have every right to put those questions in front of a jury to Mr. Posner. And that's what we have to come back to here. And Kevin Barrett made this point with me last week, and he was right. And everybody who's written about your case, at least in the independent media, has made this central point. Forget about what you think is right and what you think is wrong. Forget about what you think of Mr. Posner and the actual school and the shooting. Yeah. The fact is, it is absolutely shocking that you don't get to put these points in a court of law and let a jury decide, is there any merit to those arguments? And
Richie, I was intrigued by your conversation with Kevin, which I, of course, have listened to now. I mean, Kevin thought somehow I wanted to represent myself. I did not want to represent myself. I know the saying, a man who represents himself as a fool for a client. Yeah. I searched high and low. Mike Palachuk and I went through 35 to 50 different attorneys. We put out broad sweeping requests for legal assistance. No one would step forward to assist us because this case is, Sandy Hook is such a hot potato, Richie.
You couldn't get anybody, Jim.
He and I were forced to represent ourselves pro se because no one in Wisconsin would step forward to assist. We did get some legal advice from attorneys not licensed in Wisconsin, for which I was raked over the coals, because it states in the guidelines for pro se litigants that if you have the advice of anyone who's not licensed to practice in Wisconsin, you have to identify them, and I so did. And frankly, when I submitted my interlocutory appeal in order to, at the point where the liability had been determined wrongly, given all the evidence I've already describing that the death certificate was in violation of Connecticut law because not even parents are allowed to have a death certificate that's not certified, that I had 2 document examiners, both of whom had certified that not only that death certificate, but the 3 others that had surfaced were also fabrications. I was stunned when the appeals court denied my interlocutory appeal, but get this. They denied the appeal on 1 sentence, and then they had 2 paragraphs castigating me for using the legal assistance of an attorney not licensed in Wisconsin. How bad is that?
That is very bad. Did any of the attorneys in Wisconsin who turned you down, did any of them give you an explanation as to why they wouldn't represent you?
They don't want to do that. They'll just say, no, I'm not interested. That's all they're going to say. Look, we were searching high and low. It was very fortuitous that even after the summary judgment, I continued to search. And I was looking particularly for First Amendment attorneys because this is a First Amendment issue, Richie. What we have here is a classic SLAPP suit, SLAPP, S-L-A-P-P, a strategic lawsuit against public participation that's intended to punish a citizen journalist who becomes engaged in public discourse and exposing corruption by the government. It's to punish me and to set an example for others. That's exactly what was going on. Indeed, Leonard Posner himself on a blog, when he was questioned about his lawsuit against Wolfgang Halbig, when Wolfgang went to all the hearings, but Leonard didn't show up, he was represented by a completely incompetent attorney. Wolfgang requested and the judge ruled that Leonard Posner had to sit for a video deposition in the case with Wolfgang. At the very last minute, Leonard Posner withdrew from the lawsuit rather than sit for a video deposition. That's a reason why when he was scheduled here in Madison, we thought he probably would not show up. But in fact, he did. He did show. Now, on a blog, he was asked about that case, and the party was saying, well, you lost the Halbig case, and he said, no. The objective of that case was to get him to take down his Sandy Hook Justice website, which he did, and to set an example that anyone who challenges Sandy Hook is going to be dragged into court, and it's going to last a long, long time. That's right in my evidence, Richie, that Leonard Posner was identifying what was going on there. He got into this lawsuit with me to take down the book Nobody Died at Sandy Hook and to punish me for speaking out about it and for conducting so much collaborative research.
Let me jump in because I have to say, right across Twitter, my Twitter feed is very busy during the live radio show Monday to Thursday, but it's been exceptionally busy today. We had an excellent conversation in the first hour about mandatory vaccines, but it's gone crazy in the second hour. And to be fair, the majority of people tweeting favour what you're saying. They're taking the point of view that you're in the right here. That's a very interesting for me to observe that. Again, I've never said that you're not in the right or that I don't believe your sincerity. Let me ask you this. I've been dying to jump in and ask you this. If I was in your position, now I know you're a man of academia, I know that, and academics and professors, you're a bit different than the rest of us in terms of you're often, how do I put it, you're not the most diplomatic people in the world, Fetzer. Professors, right? Let's be honest about it.
Graduates of the Fetzer School of Tactics. Diplomacy.
Tactics. So the question I wanted to ask, if I was in your position, when I met Mr. Posner, the first thing I would have said to him is, I would have said, Mr. Posner, no matter what happens, I want you to know that nothing I'm doing is motivated by any bad faith or bad character or because I'm a bad man or because I like to hurt people. I've written the book and I've pursued the investigation because I believe in what I'm doing. I've not done it to cause you or anybody else any injury. That's all I'm going to say. I would have said that to him.
Richie,
did you say that to him?
Richie, at the end of the 7 hours of the video deposition, yes, I actually went up to Leonard Posner and said words that were the equivalent of what you just said, and I shook his hand.
Good for you, Jim.
Now listen. Everyone needs to understand. I'm a former Marine Corps officer. I spent 35 years in higher education offering courses in logic, critical thinking, scientific reasoning. I published more than 24 academic scholarly works on the foundation of computer science, artificial intelligence, cognitive science, evolution, and mentality. I've also published over a dozen works in conspiracy research, including now 4 on JFK, the first 3 of which shattered the cover-up by exposing, and this is crucial, Richie, the key to doing conspiracy research is sorting out the authentic evidence from the inauthentic.
The wheat from the chaff.
We discovered that the autopsy x-rays of JFK had been patched to conceal a fist-side blowout at the back of the head, that the diagram, the brain shown in diagrams and photographs is not the brain of JFK. It's a virtually completely intact brain, whereas JFK had half his brains blown out in Dealey Plaza, and that the home movies of the case, including the Zapruder, have been massively edited to conceal the true causes of death. So massively edited, Richie, that while the current film has 487 frames, the original would have had 1,000. It had 500 removed turning from Houston onto Elm, and then another 400 after the driver, William Greer, pulled the limousine to the left into a halt to make sure the president would be killed. Now, I have replicated what I did in the research on JFK by bringing together the best experts in collaborative research. No one had ever done this before, Richie, in terms of doing research on conspiracies. I brought together the best expert, a world authority on the human brain, who is also an expert on wound ballistics, a PhD in physics, who is also an MD, board certified in radiation oncology, which is a treatment of cancer using X-ray therapy. He's an expert in the interpretation of X-rays, a physician who was in trauma room number 1 when JFK's moribund body was brought in, and then 2 days later was responsible for the care and treatment of his alleged assassin in trauma room number 2. I mean, I've replicated this again and again and again. I've done it not only with JFK, but with 9/11.
With 9/11,
and now with Sandy Hook, the Boston bombing, blah, blah, blah.
Hey, just before we run out of time, Jim, sorry, because we are going to run out of time any second. I don't want to halt you, I don't want to cut you off in your prime. But just, Faisal has made a good point on Twitter. It actually occurred to me a few minutes ago, and then it left in my mind when we were talking about legal representation. What about how does the law view an accused person who cannot find legal representation? So when you can't find a lawyer to represent you, doesn't that automatically adjourn that trial, or are you still forced to speak for yourself? Could you have not got a continuance or something earlier this year?
No. In a criminal case, they'll assign a public defender. That's what they do in a criminal case. This is a civil case, and you're left to defend yourself in a civil case. But let me make just a couple of points. Anyone who wants to verify for themselves the thorough, detailed research we brought together in the book, Leonard Posner has made a concerted effort to make the PDF, which I released for free after the book was banned, unavailable. But if you go to the website of Robert David Steele, you can just put his name in, Robert David Steele with an E. Look for his Sandy Hook memoranda website, because our research from 2015 with a book in a second edition in 2016 was in essence subject to review by a memorandum series for the President of the United States edited by Robert David Steele in 2018, where you have like around 30 contributors with very short pieces, 3 to 4 page pieces. You can download my book as a PDF, and you can download the memorandum series from 2018. And the point I want to make is, Richie, none of that additional research has shown we were wrong in any significant way. We did have a minor mistake, for example, in one of the most stunning proofs that this whole thing was fraudulent, which is that you had a crime scene vehicle already in the school parking lot before the event had taken place. And you can see that it's before the event had taken place because just above the roof of the vehicle, there was a string of 4 windows in classroom 10 that are undamaged. Well, after the shooting, they'd be shot out.
They've been blown out, but how could they be so bloody sloppy? I read the summary that you sent me. This is the thing, you know.
So the flag is at full mast. You come down the flag and you look, and there's a familiar figure, Wayne Carver, leaning against the wall, awaiting the arrival of his portable mortuary tent. You have crime scene tape up for a crime that is yet to be committed, okay? We originally, in the first edition, thought that photograph had been taken the morning of the 14th, the day of the alleged shooting. Shadow analysis showed it was also actually taken the evening of the 13th. So we corrected that. If I had found there was anything significant we had wrong, I would correct it. I did so in that instance, and I would do so in any other. I would, for example, with a third edition, remove those couple of reasons about the difference in the fonts and the shaded background that led me to think it appeared to be a combination of a authentic bottom of a real death certificate with the top half of a fake, and explain the better reasons that emerged during the case of the investigation that prove that it's a fabrication. So we have this interesting juxtaposition between a legal finding that this death certificate is supposed to be authentic and the facts of the matter which demonstrate that it's not.
I wish you all the best in the coming weeks and months with the appeal, Jim. I mean, regardless of what happens, that judgment should be reduced on appeal anyway, regardless of what happens.
Well, Richie, we have all kinds of grounds for appeal, and including that, as Kevin Barrett wrote a brilliant article about it at the UNZ.com website about, let's see, what was it? The legal lynching of a truth teller about my trial. And it's fascinating. It's in two parts. One, he just gives the first part, he gives the facts of the matter. The second part, his opinions. And it now has nearly 600 comments. So you want to look for the legal lynching of a truth teller on UNZ.com, Richie. All your audience would value that. And meanwhile, if anyone wanted to contribute to my legal defense, because I'm really standing up for the First Amendment, you can go to jamesfetzer.com. jamesfetzer.com. Even have my home address. If you want to reach out or write to me directly, I would welcome that. But I want you to understand, none of this money is going to go to pay off the absurd $450,000 liability judgment. It's all going to go to support my appeal and the trial, which I ought to have to set things right and to explain what really happened at Sandy Hook for the record and benefit of the American people, which is and of the world, which is why I got into this in the first place.
JamesFetzer.com. Thanks for coming back on, Jim. I really appreciate it, and given your side of it. I have in the past reached out to various family members and invited them to come on and given them assurances that they get the same respect and the same robust debate that you and I have, and they, for whatever reason, choose not to do that. I'm aware, though, and I have been made aware that one or two people connected to Leonard Posner have been listening to this with great interest, and I would say to them again, if they want to come on with me one-to-one at any time in the future, they can do that. Thanks, Jim. JamesFetzer.com. Always a pleasure. You know the door is always open here, Jim. Thanks a lot.
Well, you're a great host, Richie, and I always appreciate coming on with you, my friend.
Thanks for that, and the best of luck, and we'll talk again real soon as it develops. Thanks, Jim. JamesFetzer.com if you want to help Jim with his legal fees. He's given assurance there that he's not trying to raise money, to source money to pay off the judgment. That's what he's saying. JamesFetzer.com. A lot of comments on it. I've not read any of them, and I didn't have any time to. So if you want to see what people have been saying there, most of the comments that came in are taking the point of view that they agree with what Jim is saying effectively. So it's twitter.com, where it says search Twitter. It's a Richie Allen Show, all one word. You might be able to hear, even though the soundproofing is excellent here in Studio A at Richie Allen Show Towers, fireworks are going off all over the gaff. It is bonfire night here in the UK. The bonfire has been lit on Buell Hill Park in Salford, a beautiful park, and I think we can expect fireworks for the next few hours. God love the animals, eh? Won't somebody please think of the animals? I want to say thanks to Jeffery Jaxen for his excellent reporting in the first hour. JeffreyJaxen.com. Do you know how to spell Jeffery? There are a couple of ways of spelling it. If you don't know Jeffrey's website, it's JEFFEREY. JEFFEREY, and Jaxen is spelled JAX for X-ray, E for Echo, N for November. Jaxen, Jaxen. So it's jeffreyjaxen.com if you haven't checked him out before. I know I played this tune last week. I know I did, but I love it. I love it, so I do. This is Hello Sunshine by Bruce Springsteen. Thanks, Jim Fetzer, jamesfetzer.com. Thanks, Jeffrey Jaxen. See you tomorrow.